But that's it. If you've got something that's a bit of a difficult problem, you might reasonably go to the Bible to see what it said, the Old Testament, and you pretty soon get an idea of what you could do and what you couldn't do in this. Now, unless you had something else, some other revelation that was as great as that, then presumably you carry on doing what you're doing.
I don't think the Bible is unequivocal, actually. I just think that it's you can use it for various arguments, various positions. The point about the church is, in that I was saying, gradually bringing Europe to a certain point. If the church's authority is accepted, it being established by Christ, then a Christian would say, well, the church has now decided the matter definitively, thus we no longer have slavery. And that's that. And in fact, I can't see a more fruitful or more practical way to proceed than that. Because otherwise, nobody will be able to authoritatively say whether we should move from one institutional form to another. There will be just endless arguments about the meaning of an old text, in this case a text called the Bible.
Well, I can see the argument, and if I take it out of religion and put it in ethics, then yes, quite so. Somebody comes along and says, this is a bad thing that you're doing, let's stop doing it. Sure. But if you take it into religion and you say, yeah, but look, we're supposed to be Christians, and because we're Christians, we follow the Bible, and the Bible does actually say something here. If it said nothing, then we could do whatever we like. But it's quite clear that it doesn't mean what you think it means. And if you say, well, we put the Bible at a lower level than we do, say, the Pope, okay, I mean, that's something that can be said. And in this particular case, I would say, well, jolly good anyway. But it is leaving Christianity, as far as I can see. There's nothing in the Bible that says that from time to time you'll see certain ways of doing things are cruel and harsh, and that will be the time when you'll know it's time to stop doing it. There's nothing like that at all.
I don't think we're putting the Pope above the Bible. We're simply saying that the church was established by Christ, and even the Bible, St. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:15, the church is the pillar and foundation of truth. Doesn't mention the Bible being that. But Scripture is inspired by God. So we have these two things, church and Bible. And as societies develop, then questions arise which hadn't arisen in the time that texts of the Bible were being written, and the church is there to answer those new questions that arise. It seems to me that a healthy religion, one that's going to function properly, must operate in this way.
Well, no, if it had an infallible church to lead it or something like that, then it wouldn't need to. There would be a back way of getting out of this. But what you've got in this case is, there are people who say, look, we've got to change this. We used to have slavery in the past, now we're going to not have it. And people would say, well, why? What is so different about now than it was to them?
Yes. Well, I think that with the rise of capitalism, analysts, often Marxist, but others, say that free labour is essential to the smooth operation of capitalism, because what you want to be able to do as a worker is to choose your employer in the free market. As an employer, you want to be able to choose your workers, and each binds to the other in the marketplace on certain terms, which both freely agree to, and which therefore will be honoured. And at the end of the term, each can walk away. So it's this model of the marketplace, which is the central, which is the pivot for the operation of capitalism.
It is, if you don't mind me saying so, a little bit unusual to take as a Catholic one's guidance from Karl Marx. No, I don't think that would be the way that would.
You've got the white beard, not me.
Of course I have. It's worrying about people like this. But no, I mean the issue about slavery in society goes back before the market, and they were already saying, well, shall we carry on doing this? And go, yeah, it's okay, we can do it. The Bible says so. Yeah. There was nothing that they particularly needed to keep on having the slavery in, say, the 12th century that didn't apply in the 17th century.
Well, I mean, you get in the 12th century, you're moving more into feudalism, aren't you? Anyway.
Yeah.
So it's already not really. There's slaves in Europe, of course, still. Not doubting that, but you see a move, don't you? It's different from ancient Athens, for example.
Oh yes, but it might have been, that if they didn't have that, and they'd have moved straight from, say, the Anglo-Saxons to the 15th century, so there've been a lot of people who were serfs and all sorts of things who wouldn't have had that chain around their neck. It might have been better in terms of mercy and also better in terms of expediency.
What would have been better?
If you'd have jumped straight from one economy to another, quite different one, rather than moving very, very slowly through the centuries. If you'd have just said, okay, all these people in the 13th century, they're not slaves, they're not anything else, they're free working men, that might have produced a better reaction to the world than having this slow step-by-step.
I don't know. I think that when you're in a particular historical moment, you operate according to your mental framework and that of your society. You don't make revolutionary ideas, and if those who do engage in revolutionary thought usually end up making a right old mess. If only for a time, a right old mess.
Well, okay, so what we have is people who are like conservatives, they carry on as much as they can doing the old things. And you have these other people who, try, let's try something else. And you say, well, these people who try something else usually make a mess of it. Now, I'm not at all denying that. But I'm saying, wouldn't it have been better if instead of leaving people in taverns trying to work out what they're going to do, you've discovered another page of the Bible and it tells you what to do. You do this fairly slowly, but not too slowly, and you don't have slavery and all that. No, not a word. God sits up there watching it all, and it's not a very pretty sight.
If you free slaves automatically, I mean, this is some of the difficulty in the United States after emancipation. That you have people in the end of the 19th century, and this was studies on this, African Americans who were in a worse position in terms of health at the end of the 19th century than they were in the mid-19th century. With slavery, of course, your master is responsible for providing you with food and shelter.
No, but he's not responsible, that's the point. He can starve them to death, he can beat them to death. He's not in any way responsible. I mean, I went and looked up the Alabama slave book, and I thought, well, this will be telling you what the rights were. No, all it is telling the slaves to say, look, if one of your slaves has run away, and he gets caught by somebody else, who then has the trouble of taking him back to you and the sort of then you owe $6 or something. It's not even like, say, with a dog. If you have a dog and you treat it badly, then the state comes along and says, well, not only are we taking this off you, but you're not allowed to have any more slaves. But nothing like that. Nothing. So the slave is actually put at a lower level than
now you
dog.
described to me the legal situation, and that's fair. What I was talking about was, in practice, the slave owner was providing shelter for his slave and food and work and so on. Of course, the slave was working for his living on the plantation or whatever it was, but the reality of the condition of freedmen at the end of the 19th century was that they were, in many cases, in a worse position than at the middle of the 19th century, and that was because masters were taking care of slaves in one way or another, and when you're free, of course, there's no obligation. So if you have a mass freeing of people, doesn't mean there's going to be work for them. The master might have had more labour than he needed. Now, the thing about capitalism is that the Marxists teach me is that you can take a man and you can pay him subsistence wages for a 14-hour day, and then you give him the wages. How he manages to survive is his business, none of your concern. And in a pool of labour that is huge, he can starve because you've got plenty more you can get employ. With the slave-master relationship, and even more with the feudal relationship, in practice, that wasn't the way it was. There was more of a responsibility. And so, yes, when capitalism develops to the state it has developed in the Western world, it's far better to be a free labour than not. But that isn't necessarily the case everywhere in the world at all times.
Not everywhere. There are these cases of people who are worse off than they were before. But I think they rate quickly in the turnabouts that they have. This becomes a very low number. And yet certain people, put them forward and say, well, look at that. Well, yeah, look at that, but look at all the rest of it. The North was desperately trying to get more people, which they were doing partly by getting people coming over from Europe. It's even easier if it's somebody down the road. So you give them better terms and this sort of thing. There was a lot of people moving from the Black South up to the White. It would be people who maybe had to stay somewhere for a particular reason, like that. Mother's got a bad leg or something like that, or they're so poor or so uneducated that they've no start that they could take. There were these people, but they were not the average black person. A lot of them went out and became cowboys.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a good, healthy job, and when you always see cowboys and Indians, you never see a black one. But there are a lot of them. Yeah. So it could have been done very much better.
Of course.
It was certainly. I didn't expect you to argue with me on that one. But what eventually happens is that you have to, in a sense, get rid of the Bible in order to do it. Once you can get rid of the Bible, once you can say, well, it might say that in the Bible, but we're going to do something else. Oh, things move. Well, when you say, well, we'd better do this by the book, no, it doesn't.
Though the emancipation movement in England was very much inspired by Protestant Christianity.
There wasn't much.
And of course Quakerism, which was obviously a significant offshoot from Protestantism.
Yeah, but there's very, very few black slaves in England. What you tend to get occasionally is some lord who wants to strut around. And he thinks it would be rather spiffing to have a man with all this dressed up stuff be his bearer and things like that. But it's not like it was in the South.
Oh, but I think in England's a special case. The idea in England, I think, was that a slave could not breathe the air of England and remain a slave. So there were some cases back in the 17th century about this. But just on the general point, I certainly don't think that you can move from one kind of society to another rapidly. It simply is inevitable that it will be a slow transformation, and ideally it won't erupt into war as it did in the United States, because you don't want 500,000 dead people over any issue, but hopefully you can by peaceful means resolve a problem. Whatever happens, however you resolve it, short of a major revolutionary change, and in the French Revolution they too abolished slavery for a time. I think Napoleon restored it. But there has to be a recognition, I think, that individual societies move slowly, and that's because there is no model in the mind of free labour until we get to capitalism.
So how is it that Britain was able to abolish slavery a long time before the Americans did, even longer in places like Brazil? It doesn't seem obvious.
I think that certain societies, for various reasons, will move in different ways. But Britain did not have a huge agricultural population of imported Africans and people of African descent. And so if that had been the case all over the southeast of England, we might have had a different outcome, or maybe a slower outcome to abolition. There was, of course, there was the big fight in Parliament. The attempts to abolish slavery were initially failed, of course. Eventually, it succeeds, but there are slave interests which have to be overcome. So in England, the balance of forces were a certain way in England. They were different in the USA, different in the north, different in the south. It just happens that way, doesn't it? You will get different approaches because of the different set of social circumstances.
Oh yes, yes.